Hello and welcome to Freshly Served Healthy Vegan Recipes. I'm Heather and today by viewer request I'm going to make kale chips and show you how to do that. I haven't done them before because there are a ton of recipes out there and they are fairly simple in terms of the recipe, but there is a technique to them, so I'm going to mostly focus on the technique, and I'm going to a recipe which you can find at healthyveganrecipes.net. If you're wondering the noise in the background, we've got some rain / freezing rain going on today, and there are some hunks of snow and ice that are falling off the roof. So what we're going to start with is some kale, and I've got some washed and ready to go. What you want to do is take your kale and rip off pieces. They don't need to be too small. That's probably about perfect size. And they're going to be turned into chips, obviously. So, so you don't want them to be too small, but you also don't want them to be too big. There's nothing like having a chip that big and having to go. Anyway, so rip up your kale. And this week on my nutrition blog over at healthyeatingstartshere.com, I've been talking about weight loss, and kale chips make an excellent snack for weight loss. Snacks when you're trying to lose weight should usually be fruit or vegetable based, and kale chips are a nice way to make a yummy chip with very little calories and get some otherwise not usually too friendly vegetables into your diet. If you're looking for other ways to make kale, last week I did a kale salad that was massaged. You can find that at healthyveganrecipes.net as well. So there's one that's a little bit big, so I'm gonna rip that in half. This is a very complex part of the operation. You need to have all of your mental faculties moving on this one. Now you can bake your kale chips in the oven or in a dehydrator. If you do it in a dehydrator, the kale can stay more raw and retain more of its nutrients because it's going at a lower temperature. But if you want to do it in the oven, if you don't have a dehydrator, totally fine. I'm going to do mine in the oven today. I would normally dehydrate them, but my dehydrator is in a box in the shed and I don't want to go look for it. So what I'm going to do is put the oven to the very lowest temperature that I can. Usually that's about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can start your oven now, or what I usually do is just wait until I have everything ready, pop the kale in, and then start the oven at that point. It doesn't really need to be preheated for this purpose. If you're making something like bread or muffins, yeah, but kale chips doesn't matter too much. Also, the lower temperature, again, is better for retaining nutrients. Now, the temperature will depend how much time it's going to take to bake. Dehydrator takes quite a while, and oven is pretty quick. So I've got all my kale ripped into pieces here, and what you can do at this point, if you like, to make them a little bit softer, a little bit moister, is to massage them. And I showed this technique in the kale salad last week. You can add a bit of salt here if you like, or you can just use your hands. And what this is going to do is soften the kale up a bit, release some of the moisture so I can feel it getting a little bit wet in my hands, and it'll mean that as you bake it, it won't be quite as tough. So I found when I was starting to make kale chips that a lot of recipes just call for olive oil and some salt and maybe some seasonings, whatever you feel like. But what I found in my experience is that if you want the seasoning to really stick to your kale and make a nice, nice crunchy, really flavorful chip, what you can do is actually blend up some nuts or seeds. I like to use sunflower seeds. They're a little bit lower in fat than most nuts. Got lots of nutrients. And I blend the sunflower seeds with some water till they're nice and smooth, and then add my seasonings to that, dip the kale chips in, and get them ready to bake. So what I'm going to start with is showing you how to put this together. This little miniature food processor is perfect for this purpose. If you don't have one, you can use a regular size. or you can grind up the seeds, or if you choose to use nuts, in a coffee grinder and then mix things together. But what I'm actually going to add to this mix is a little bit of fresh onion, and you do need to use some kind of food processor for that. And then I'm going to put in a little bit of water. You don't want too much because you want this to be nice and smooth and thick. It might take a little while to get it fairly smooth, especially because this little food processor is lower speed than a regular size food processor, but get it relatively smooth, and then you're going to add your seasonings. And I'm going to do some dill. And that's why I put the onion in there. The onion is one of my seasonings, so if you're doing a different flavor, you don't need to put it in there. So some dill. And I love using nutritional yeast for a cheesy flavor. So I'm going for kind of a sour cream and onion kind of flavor here. Let's see. Some of that in. And then some salt. Okay. Then I'm going to put the lid back on and give this one last mix to combine the flavors. So important to give your mix a taste before you go slathering it all over your kale. Make sure you like it. It's nice. It's quite oniony because the onion is raw. If you have onion powder, that's a really nice option as well. But because we're gonna put this in the oven and bake it, I think it'll be okay. If you're dehydrating this, I would probably really recommend onion powder over fresh onion, or just make sure you don't use too much because it can get pretty strong. Okay. So take your mix, and what I'm going to do is pour it onto my kale and then mix it in with my hands. It's always good to get your hands into your food when you can. Really connect with it, you know? Just make sure your hands are washed first. All right, there is our mix with the kale, and as I mix this in and make sure the kale gets a little bit, I wanted to point out that the kale itself is low calorie. The sunflower seeds do have calories. They also have a lot of nutrients, so I prefer them over, say, olive oil for this purpose. But the less mixture you use to coat your kale, the lower calorie they will be. So try to get them all mixed and get a little bit of coating on all of the kale. Sometimes you'll wind up with some chunky bits of sunflower seed. Those will be nice. They'll make for a nice crunch on your kale chips. Okay, so then you're gonna lay these out as thinly as possible onto a baking sheet. Okay, and I've got my baking sheet lined with parchment paper. Sometimes people ask what to use to line their dehydrator trays because they sell this Teflon type stuff as a liner. When I use my dehydrator, I usually just use parchment paper. Works just as well, plus you don't have to worry about any kind of weird Teflon side effects. Okay. So, like I said, get them spread out as evenly as possible so they all get the heat. Pop them in the oven, lowest temperature as you like. The lower, the longer it'll take. So you know your chips are done when they are really nice and crispy. I'll post the recipe at healthyveganrecipes.net along with some other flavor combinations. And remember, you can do this with things other than kale. You could do it with charred other greens, or I often do it with zucchini slices or eggplant slices as well. So go check out the recipe and send me your favorite flavor combinations as well. Hope you enjoy. I'm Heather from healthyveganrecipes.net.